It was a warm, golden day in Coventry, England, during the summer of 1972. 16-year-old Sheila Fox left her modest family home on a quiet residential street. Her laughter filled the air as she bid her younger siblings farewell, her mother calling out a gentle reminder to return in time for tea. Sheila, a lively and independent teenager, was known for her sharp wit and kind heart, a girl with a bright future ahead of her. As the clock ticked through the afternoon and into the evening, Sheila's absence became increasingly noticeable. At first, her family thought she might have lost track of time, chatting with friends or stopping by the local shop. But when the evening sky turned to twilight, their concern grew into a gnawing fear. Sheila was not one to break her word. Her father stepped out to check familiar haunts, while her mother made frantic phone calls to neighbors. By midnight, the family knew something was terribly wrong. The sense of dread that filled their home that night would come to haunt them for decades. What began as a regular day had now become the start of one of the most confounding mysteries in British history. In the hours after Sheila's disappearance, the police began piecing together her last known movements. Multiple witnesses reported seeing her that afternoon walking along Coventry's bustling main street. Dressed in her favorite summer dress, her school bag slung casually over one shoulder, Sheila appeared every bit the carefree teenager. Yet, one witness described an unsettling scene. A man unfamiliar to anyone in the area was seen following closely behind her. He was described as middle-aged, tall, with a nondescript appearance that made him blend into the crowd. Some said he looked like he might have been trying to talk to Sheila, though whether she acknowledged him remained unclear. Who was this man? Was he someone Sheila knew, or a complete stranger? The lack of clarity surrounding his intentions cast a long shadow over the investigation. As details emerged, the sighting painted a picture that was equal parts routine and ominous, a girl walking home under the watchful eyes of someone she may not have even noticed. The man and the questions he left behind would haunt this case for decades. The Fox family, now gripped by panic, turned to the local authorities. Within hours, a search party was mobilized. Neighbors joined in, flashlights piercing the darkness as they scoured every corner of the community. The local parks, overgrown canals, and abandoned warehouses were meticulously searched. Flyers bearing Sheila's photo were printed and distributed across Coventry and beyond. The image of her bright, smiling face, framed by her wavy brown hair, became an indelible symbol of hope and despair. The police canvassed the area, interviewing shopkeepers, bus drivers, and anyone who might have seen or heard anything unusual. Leads trickled in. A neighbor thought they heard a car screeching late that night. Another claimed to have seen a girl matching Sheila's description entering a shop earlier that day. Each lead raised the family's hopes, only for them to be dashed when they led to nothing. Despite the community's tireless efforts, Sheila seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was as though the earth had swallowed her whole, leaving behind only questions, heartbreak, and a chilling void where a young life had once been. As days turned into weeks, the investigation shifted focus. The police, desperate for answers, began scrutinizing those who might have had any connection to Sheila's disappearance. Known offenders in the area were questioned relentlessly, their movements on the day of her disappearance examined under a microscope. Some were evasive, others cooperative, but none provided a concrete link to Sheila's case. Suspicion soon extended to those closer to home. Sheila's schoolmates, many of whom had seen her that day, were interrogated. Gossip swirled about petty rivalries or unspoken grudges. Yet none of the students could offer anything beyond vague recollections. Attention also turned to itinerant workers passing through Coventry. The city, a hub of industrial activity, often hosted transient laborers who moved from job to job. These drifters, unfamiliar and faceless to the community, became easy scapegoats. One man in particular, a builder with a questionable history, caught the attention of investigators, but like all the other leads, this too faded into nothingness. The lack of evidence and mounting dead ends cast a dark cloud over the investigation. It was as though Sheila had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only shadows of suspicion and mounting frustration. For the Fox family, life as they knew it had been shattered. Sheila's parents, her mother a homemaker and her father a factory worker, became the face of a relentless search for their missing daughter. Each morning began with renewed determination, scouring for any sign of hope. They knocked on doors, pleaded with local news outlets, and stood outside shops handing out flyers. Their appeals often included Sheila's favorite things, a love for reading, her dream of becoming a teacher, details meant to humanize her, to keep her memory alive in the minds of strangers. Despite their efforts, they couldn't escape the whispers. Small towns have long memories and sharp tongues, and Coventry was no exception. Some speculated that Sheila had run away, tired of the constraints of her small town life. Others believed she had met a grim fate and that the family's hope was little more than denial. For Sheila's parents, the absence of answers was torture. Each day without news felt like an eternity. Yet through it all, they refused to stop searching. Their enduring hope became both a source of strength and a heartbreaking testament to the depths of their love. Coventry, a city once brimming with post-war optimism, now carried the weight of Sheila's disappearance like a shroud. It was no longer just her family who felt her absence; her vanishing left an indelible mark on the entire community. Parents grew wary, forbidding their children from walking home alone or venturing into the wooded edges of town. Schools began holding assemblies on safety, warning students to stay in groups and avoid talking to strangers. The sight of a young girl walking alone now sent shivers through even the most casual observer. The mystery didn't just create fear, it bred mistrust. Neighbors began to look at one another with suspicion, wondering if the person responsible was still among them. Was it the quiet man who lived at the edge of town? The shopkeeper who always seemed a bit too friendly? Or perhaps the factory worker who suddenly moved away without a word? For Coventry, the disappearance of Sheila Fox was not just a tragedy. It was a wound that refused to heal, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the unsettling realization that some questions might never be answered. As the years passed, the intensity of Sheila's case began to wane. Initial momentum gave way to a painful quiet. By the late 1970s, with no new leads, the case was shelved. Police resources shifted to other pressing matters, and Sheila's disappearance was consigned to the growing list of unsolved cases. For the Fox family, however, time did not dull their anguish. Sheila's mother still kept her daughter's room just as it had been the day she disappeared, refusing to let go of the possibility that Sheila might return. Her father, once a robust and optimistic man, seemed to age prematurely, burdened by the weight of not knowing. Birthdays, holidays, and family milestones were shadowed by her absence. Despite the dwindling public interest, the family clung to their belief that Sheila was alive somewhere. That hope, though a fragile thread, was all they had left. But as the calendar pages turned into decades, even the most resilient hearts began to crack under the weight of silence. In the early 1990s, a renewed wave of attention swept through the Coventry Police Department. Advances in technology, particularly the advent of DNA analysis, gave investigators new tools to tackle old cases. Cold case detectives reopened Sheila's file, hoping that science might provide the answers that had eluded them for decades. Boxes of evidence were unpacked and combed through with meticulous care. Items from Sheila's last known day, a school notebook, a stray hair found near a canal, and reports from witnesses were re-examined. Officers reached out to the original witnesses, some of whom were now elderly, to see if time had brought clarity to their memories. Yet, for all the promise of modern techniques, the investigation yielded no breakthroughs. Key evidence had degraded over time, and some of the original files were incomplete, lost to the passage of years. The sense of optimism that had ignited the reinvestigation slowly dimmed. By the late 1990s, Sheila's case was once again placed back in the archives. The unanswered question remained: was Sheila still out there, living a life unknown to her family? Or had her story ended long ago in a tragedy that left no trace? The breakthrough came unexpectedly in January 2025. During a public appeal for information on several cold cases, a faded photograph was unearthed from an old family album. The image, taken decades earlier, showed a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Sheila Fox. The photograph wasn't dated, but its grainy quality and the woman's hairstyle suggested it had been taken in the mid to late 1970s. Her features, her wide eyes, and the curve of her smile mirrored those of the girl who had vanished in 1972. But the image raised more questions than answers. Who had taken the photo? And more importantly, where? The police released the photograph to the public, along with an emotional plea from surviving members of Sheila's family. Media outlets seized upon the mystery, reigniting public interest. Social media buzzed with speculation as amateur sleuths dissected every detail of the image. Some believed the photograph hinted at a life Sheila might have built elsewhere. Others theorized it was evidence of a sinister plot. For the first time in decades, the name Sheila Fox was on everyone's lips. The photograph was a lifeline, pulling her case back into the light, but it also brought with it a renewed sense of urgency and a chilling question. If Sheila was alive, why had she stayed silent for so long? The release of the faded photograph sparked a media frenzy, captivating not just the nation but the world. Sheila Fox, a name that had faded into obscurity over the decades, was suddenly everywhere. News outlets replayed clips from the 1970s, showing her smiling school photos and the desperate pleas of her grieving family. The photograph, grainy and mysterious, seemed to breathe new life into the case. On social media, amateur detectives dissected the image with fervor. Some speculated that Sheila had run away to escape some unknown turmoil, while others proposed darker theories involving abduction or coercion. Online forums filled with debates over her expression in the photo. Was she happy, afraid, or hiding something? The photograph also struck a nerve with those who remembered the original case. Survivors of Coventry's older generation recounted the fear that had gripped the town in the aftermath of her disappearance. Younger audiences, unfamiliar with the case, were drawn into the mystery, creating a perfect storm of intrigue and speculation. As the image circulated and theories multiplied, the entire nation held its breath. Was this finally the clue that would unravel a mystery that had haunted them for more than 50 years? The turning point came in the form of an unexpected phone call. Amid the flood of public attention, an elderly woman contacted the authorities, claiming she recognized the girl in the photograph. Her voice trembled with emotion as she explained that many years ago she had lived near someone who bore a striking resemblance to Sheila. The woman, who resided in a small town far from Coventry, provided a detailed account of a young woman who arrived in their community in the late 1970s. She had gone by a different name, kept to herself, and avoided answering questions about her past. Despite her quiet demeanor, the elderly woman remembered her clearly. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face. Detectives, skeptical but intrigued, acted swiftly. This was the most substantial lead they had received in decades. They cross-referenced records and canvassed the area, searching for any trace of the person described. As more details aligned, their skepticism gave way to cautious optimism. Could this be the break they had been waiting for all these years? Following the lead, investigators traveled to the quiet, unassuming town where the elderly woman had said Sheila or someone matching her description might be living. The town, far removed from the bustling streets of Coventry, seemed an unlikely place for a mystery to unravel. Knocking on the door of a modest home, the investigators held their breath. When the door opened, they were met by a woman in her 60s. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes carried a lifetime of untold stories. She looked nothing like the teenage girl who had disappeared decades ago, and yet there was no mistaking her face. "Sheila," one of the detectives asked softly. For a moment there was silence. Then tears welled up in the woman's eyes, and she nodded. It was her. Sheila Fox, the girl who had vanished without a trace in 1972, was alive and well. She had been living under a different name, her past buried beneath layers of secrecy and time. The revelation sent shockwaves across the nation. After more than 5 decades of silence, the mystery of Sheila's disappearance had been solved, but the answers it provided only deepened the intrigue. Why had she left? What had kept her away? And what secrets still lingered behind her guarded expression? The discovery of Sheila Fox alive and well after over 50 years sent shockwaves throughout the United Kingdom and beyond. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, splashing headlines like, "The girl who vanished and reappeared, Sheila Fox found after 5 decades." Morning shows, podcasts, and social media platforms buzzed with discussions and debates. How could someone vanish so completely and remain undetected for so long? Theories flourished. Some believed Sheila had been abducted but later escaped, choosing to start anew. Others speculated she had run away from something traumatic and built a new life far from Coventry. A darker narrative suggested she might have been coerced into staying silent all these years. The public fascination with Sheila's story reached fever pitch. People from all walks of life, from retired detectives to armchair sleuths, weighed in with their interpretations of the mystery. Yet, amid the excitement and speculation, one truth loomed large. The answers to Sheila's disappearance remained as elusive as ever. Despite the intense public interest, authorities maintained a careful silence regarding Sheila's life during the missing years. Citing her right to privacy, they released only the barest details. She had lived under an assumed name in a rural town and had established a life far removed from her origins. Beyond that, the specifics were locked away, leaving the public to fill in the blanks. Was she taken? Did she leave willingly? And if so, what compelled her to abandon her family and hometown? The absence of answers only fueled speculation. Some theorized that Sheila had suffered a trauma so severe that she felt she had no choice but to disappear. Others wondered if she had been manipulated into believing she could never return. Every silence, every vague detail seemed to add layers to the mystery. People who had followed the case for decades struggled to reconcile the smiling teenager from 1972 with the reclusive woman discovered in 2025. The truth of her journey remained known only to Sheila, and she showed no inclination to share her story with the world. For Sheila's surviving family, the news of her discovery was both a shock and a miracle. Decades of mourning and unanswered questions had taken a toll on her parents, who had passed away without ever knowing the truth. But for Sheila's siblings, now grown with families of their own, her return was a bittersweet gift. The reunion, though deeply emotional, was layered with complexity. The joyful embraces were tinged with an undercurrent of disbelief and grief for the years they had lost. Questions hung in the air. What had happened to her? Why hadn't she reached out? For her siblings, seeing Sheila alive was a moment they had dreamed of for years. Yet they couldn't ignore the vast distance that time and secrets had created. Sheila, now a woman in her 60s, seemed like a stranger to them, her life a book with missing chapters. The Fox family, though forever changed, found a sense of closure in Sheila's return. The mystery of her disappearance might never fully be resolved, but knowing she was alive offered a measure of peace they had thought they would never find. The news of Sheila Fox's reappearance rippled through Coventry, a city that had carried the weight of her disappearance for more than 50 years. For many, it was a moment of relief, proof that, against all odds, Sheila was alive. But that relief was accompanied by an unsettling sense of unease. How could a girl disappear so completely, right under their noses, only to resurface decades later? Questions swirled about the investigation itself. What about the man who was last seen following her? Had he played a role in her disappearance, or was his presence a coincidence that had haunted the case unnecessarily? Some residents, particularly those who had lived in Coventry during the 1970s, couldn't shake a lingering guilt. Had they missed something? Could the community have done more to find Sheila or prevent her from vanishing in the first place? The reappearance of Sheila forced Coventry to confront not just the mystery of her disappearance, but also the fragility of trust and the fallibility of justice. For a community that had been haunted by unanswered questions, her return brought as much reflection as it did closure. Though the world rejoiced at the news of Sheila's return, the mystery surrounding her disappearance deepened. Why had she left? What had she experienced during her years away? And most importantly, what had kept her from reaching out to her family? Sheila, now an elderly woman, chose to remain silent. Her guarded demeanor left investigators and the public grasping for answers. Theories abounded. Was she escaping a dangerous situation? Had she been coerced into starting a new life? Or was her disappearance a choice driven by personal struggles or emotional pain? Her siblings, though overjoyed by her return, were left with the same unanswered questions that had tormented them for decades. They respected Sheila's decision to withhold the details, but her silence created a gulf that seemed impossible to bridge. The reemergence of Sheila Fox was both a revelation and a riddle. For every answer it provided, it left a dozen more questions in its wake. Without Sheila's story, the full truth of her disappearance and the years she spent in the shadows might never be known. Sheila's discovery underscored the incredible power of modern technology and public engagement in solving cold cases. A single photograph, long forgotten and buried among family belongings, had become the catalyst for her reappearance. In the 1970s, investigators relied on word of mouth, printed flyers, and door-to-door searches methods that often yielded limited results. By 2025, advances in technology had transformed the landscape of investigations. Digital archives, facial recognition software, and social media amplified the reach of Sheila's story, enabling it to capture the attention of a new generation. The photograph's circulation online was pivotal. Shared widely on social media platforms, it reached corners of the country that traditional methods never could have. It inspired everyday people to become amateur detectives, digging through old memories and piecing together fragments of the past. Ultimately, the discovery of Sheila was a testament to the power of persistence and innovation. What once seemed impossible, a 50-year-old mystery solved, was made possible by the intersection of human determination and technological progress. The case became a beacon of hope for other cold cases, proving that time and distance are no match for the truth when the right tools and people come together. Sheila Fox's silence left the public and investigators grasping for answers, and in the absence of her account, theories began to multiply. The most common speculation was that Sheila had run away to escape a troubled home life or personal struggles that she had kept hidden. Her disappearance at 16, a time of youthful rebellion and emotional vulnerability, seemed to fit this narrative. Others, however, painted a darker picture. Some believed that Sheila had been abducted and held against her will, perhaps coerced into silence or manipulated into believing she could never return. Could she have been a victim of human trafficking, or had she fallen into the clutches of someone who controlled her life for decades? Another theory suggested that Sheila had suffered a traumatic event that led to memory loss or a decision to sever ties with her past. Perhaps she had created a new identity to protect herself from something or someone she feared. Theories continued to evolve, fueled by the lack of clarity and the tantalizing gaps in her story. Her reappearance had answered one critical question, whether she was alive, but it had also opened the door to a labyrinth of mysteries that might never be resolved. Sheila Fox's disappearance and subsequent reappearance will forever stand as one of the most enigmatic chapters in the UK's history of missing person cases. Her story transcends its time, becoming a haunting reminder of the complexity of human lives and the questions that often remain unanswered. For decades, her face was a symbol of hope and loss, her name etched into the collective memory of a nation. The revelation that she was alive brought relief, but also deepened the intrigue surrounding her life and choices. How could a vibrant young girl disappear so completely, and why had she chosen, if it was a choice at all, to remain silent for so long? The public debates about Sheila's life will continue for years, as will the speculation about the truths she has chosen to keep hidden. What secrets does she carry? What pain has she endured? And what does her silence reveal about the weight of the years she spent away? The case of Sheila Fox remains a testament to the resilience of those who never gave up searching and the enduring mystery of the human experience. While the world may never fully understand her journey, one thing is certain: her story will not be forgotten. The unanswered questions will linger, casting their shadow over her remarkable return, a mystery that may forever remain just out of reach.